Welcome everyone to this webinar from GOGLA on the industry response for the off-grid solar sector to COVID-19. My name is Koen Peters. We'll give you another 2 minutes to prepare and for other people to join. So if you can hang with us for another 2 minutes and then we get officially started. So welcome everyone. I think we should get started. It is a minute after 3. There's about 138 people that have signed on. So welcome everyone listening in to this webinar organized by GOGLA to coordinate an industry response for the off-grid solar sector on COVID-19. Sasha, can you click onto the agenda? Thank you very much. So what we'll present to you this afternoon or this morning, wherever you're based, or this evening, is an introduction and an overview of where we stand as an industry and what we know about the impact of COVID-19 on the industry. Evelien Janssen from the GOGLA team will present the results from a survey and what does the industry need now. We'll hear from Namori Doumbia, our regional representative for West Africa, around advocacy, and then Evelien will also talk about the coordination work that GOGLA is doing towards the sector and our partners. And then we've invited Sarah Bieber, Leslie Dabruto from Acumen, and Dirk Munk from Persistent to talk about what investors at the moment are trying to do for the industry. And hopefully we'll have ample time for Q&A. On the Q&A, I would ask you to put your questions in the chat box. There is no function here to raise your hand or to speak out. We're with too many people on the webinar. But if you put your questions in the chat box, we will see that. The default setting in the chat box is that your questions go to the organizers and the panelists, and I request you to keep it at that, so that the panelists can see the questions. So feel free to ask questions, and in the second half of the webinar, we'll get to that. Sasha, can I have the next slide? Thank you very much. So it's just a little bit more than a month ago that we met all, or many of you, with the industry in Nairobi for our forum, where we were all very excited about the progress of the industry so far. We're sad that Chinese participants couldn't join us there, and where many of us, including me, were thinking that the COVID pandemic, then not a pandemic, but the COVID epidemic, was mostly about supply chain disruption, products not being supplied from China. We're now five weeks further, and the situation has changed quite dramatically, with the virus, of course, having spread across the world, and now starting to spread also in developing countries, in Africa, in India, and other countries. And what we see is that governments are starting to impose restrictions on travel and on work, and where that's not happening, companies themselves are wondering, do we have a responsibility to reduce the travel from our team? Do we need to protect our team? Do we need to protect our customers against us spreading the virus? And we see people again concerned about operational restrictions. We are discussing with governments, and we'll talk more about that, as seeing off-grid solar electrification as part of essential services, because at the same time our industry also contributes to energy for powering appliances, including information appliances, and we can contribute to providing information in general. But we think this is still only the beginning that we see right now, and we think there's significant issues ahead, following up from where we stand right now, which is much more than just a health situation, but also an economic situation. We think that customer wallets are going to be slimmer in the future, and we think that this might have an effect on the ability of customers to pay for off-grid solar products. We are worried that HR resources of industry players are going to be affected, with staff members falling ill. We're concerned about foreign exchange rates changing and having negative impacts on the industry. And we're concerned about funding, new funding being less available to the industry, as also investors are going to take a hit or are going to look at managing their risks. And what I put here on the slide is a headline from a press release from UNCTAD yesterday, that also the UN thinks that this is going to be the COVID situation, and its fallout in economic terms is going to be a major hit for developing countries. As Gogla, we have been alarmed now for a few weeks, and our role towards the industry is mostly informing the industry of all information and guidance that we can find and we think is relevant for the industry in dealing with the situation right now, and in making sure that we understand really well what the industry needs to see itself through this situation and communicate those needs to people that need to hear that: governments, investors, donors, people that can work with us and with the industry to come up with a response. What we've done so far is we've launched a survey, which we will present after this overview, on what members feel right now that they need. We think this is a snapshot picture that might change significantly over time. We've put some basic guidance for members on our website and share that with members, some pointers for where to think of in terms of reacting to the COVID situation. We've created dedicated information channels, particularly our resource page on our website, this webinar, and we've also held Africa and India working group calls last week. We've connected with a group of investors, a rapidly growing group of investors, and Sarah, Leslie, and Dirk speaking later were the initiators of this network. And in that network, a proposal is being developed for a relief fund, which Gogla strongly endorses and which we help develop as much as we can. And you will hear more about that later in this webinar. We've reached out to governments, and our main ask is to recognize off-grid as an essential service, and telling them that we might also be a partner for them in informing the public. We've reached out to national renewable energy associations with guidance, and we are at the moment reaching out to partners and sector facilitators to coordinate, in particular, the technical assistance needs in the sector. With that, I will stop as a general overview, and we're going to dive into a little bit more detail of some of the actions that I just presented. First off is Evelien Janssen talking about the results of a survey that we held among Gogla members. Evelien, over to you.
Thanks, Koen. Yeah, so I'll be sharing some insights. As Koen already mentioned, we surveyed our members to really get an overview on how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting companies in the sector, and we really wanted to hear also from companies what they are experiencing. The purpose is to provide a clear picture of what the sector needs right now, towards the various stakeholders, such as DFIs or government, as well as to map out where COCLA can continue to play a role, and where we can coordinate and support most effectively. So I'll be sharing some details on the outcome of the survey, as well as I want to dive into some more targeted questions regarding specific support needs, where we will need your input. So I'm going to ask you to stay engaged. We'll do this via poll questions in the webinar, and also via more detailed input in the chat box, but more on that later. The majority of our members, as you can see on the slide, are companies active in the sector. The majority of our respondents are companies active in the sector. And we've segmented the results for manufacturers, distributors, and vertically integrated service companies for you to show. So some basic statistics are shown. I can tell you that most of the respondents are active in sub-Saharan Africa, and then the next market's India, quite logically. So averaged from all our respondents, the disruption that people are feeling is a bit over 7 on a scale to 10. So the survey has been running now for almost 10 days, where we ask companies to report. And basically, it shows that the overall level of disruption that is felt is actually going up in time. So how the situation is developing, the companies are becoming more and more concerned. And I think also one thing that we saw is that vertically integrated businesses and distributors are most heavily impacted, or feel most disruption by this situation. So here I will basically go through the different categories. Overall, there is about almost 80% that's either they indicate that they're quite concerned or that they're alarmed about the impact that this will have. Manufacturers on average feel the lowest level of disruption, but they indicate as well that their biggest challenges that they foresee is their HR capacity and ceased operations. Now the next category is vertically integrated companies. They indicate the highest level of disruption felt, and their main challenges are ceased operations as well, reduced demand for new sales, and basically a decrease in customers' ability to pay. Distributors then are kind of in between. They have a level of disruption of 7.4. And their main challenges that they see is inventory management and, again, ceased operations. So overall, the biggest challenge, biggest immediate challenge, I think, on the short term is the ceased operations of sales agents, either due to governmental guidelines or company protocol, disrupting new sales and after-sales support. So basically, so here I showed the challenges in a bit more detail, aggregated for all the companies. I won't linger too long on this. I just wanted to quickly share that it's a bit more detail on what those buckets were. But in addition to these foreseen challenges, we also asked our companies to share to what extent they estimate they can sustain their business through the crisis. And so the majority of all companies indicate that they can sustain this situation for about 3 to 4 months before the situation becomes problematic. With the latest results coming in over the weekend, the manufacturer's outlook is again the least bleak, I would say. There is about a third that says they can sustain it for 3 or 4 months, but there is also a good chunk that says, okay, we'll make it to 6 months before we really struggle. Of the next category, the vertically integrated companies, there is about 50% that say they can survive 3 to 4 months. But there's also already quite a chunk of already 9% that indicates that they will be in immediate financial trouble. And when you look at the distributors here, you can also see that that picture is kind of similar. So there's like 3 to 4 months, but then they get into quite some trouble. There is a chunk that's quite, 22% that will almost have immediate financial trouble. So this all looks quite concerning. So overall, so as I said already, like 50% more or less can sustain and then get in trouble, and there's an average of 11% that is an immediate problems. Now, moving to more specifics on then the support that companies indicate that they need most. Quite logically, I guess the most urgent needs are financial ones. So relief funds and bridging loans are shown to be most needed. So below here, you see a more specific breakdown on the specific size of the funding needs for the different company types. So financial support is, as Koen already said, something that Gogla is working together with the Energy Access Action Group, of which you'll hear a bit more later in the webinar. But aside to financial needs, there's also this bucket that you see here on the side, where there is a lot of support needs. And here is where we would like to take some time right now to get additional clarity on. So what we've received as input from the survey regarding needs like technical assistance and practical support needs was the following. And from our end, our next step is basically to map these, to map the needs, as it were, and in more detail, and that will really help us with what we should feedback to our partners and stakeholders with regards to what what companies need. So this is where I will need your attention. We'll do this now via 2 ways. I have 3 polls that I'm launching, which have specific support options around the 3 topical areas that are shown here below. And from each of these polls, you will be asked to indicate what you need as a company, what you need most. But since we understand that at the same time, we likely won't capture all kind of like the nuances of your needs with these 3 polls, I also want to ask you to please share via the chat box, and you can do that directly to us, the organizers, what your company needs are in terms of technical assistance and practical support. So you can do this, the chat box, throughout the whole webinar. So please feel free to take your time and share details. It's really, the more we hear and know, the better we as Gogla can kind of target our efforts. So I'll want to launch the first poll right now. It's written out here. I'll launch it now, and it will pop up actually on your screen, and this slide will be gone. But let me talk you through it. So what would be most helpful in terms of business continuity support? So is that technical assistance around analyzing repayment risks through risk management TA? Is that TA around adopting business models or digitalization, advertising, etc.? Is that guidance around what support to give customers and how during these times we need to deal with rescheduling payment schedules, extending relief, communication, etc.? Is that also to receive an overview of local manufacturers and other options of obtaining stock? Or is it support in ensuring that mobile money payments are, for example, still possible? So yeah, I'm going to leave this open for another 10 seconds. Please select the one that is most like the prior need for your company. And also please remember, if anything pops up in your mind, drop it in the chat box. All right. I will close this poll. I can quickly share, I'll do it after every poll. I'll quickly share with you what comes out. But please also note that we will be sharing the results afterwards as well, directly to your inbox. So this is what's coming out. Technical assistance around analyzing repayment risks and risk management, and guidance around what support to give to customers. All right, the next poll is around finance and fundraising. Again, I'll need your input. So in terms of finance and fundraising support, do you most need either technical assistance around assessing financial sustainability and cash run rate through, for example, scenario testing, mitigation measures, liquidity management? Would you actually most appreciate an overview of emergency funds? Do you need an overview of the types of funding available and the features? Or should focus be mostly on support in paying and retaining staff? All right, fantastic. I'll leave it. I'm monitoring in the meantime if votes are still coming in, and they are. So I'll leave it open for another 10 seconds. All right, fantastic. So the results here is that an overview of emergency funds is extremely appreciated. That's well noted. And also kind of an overview of funding types available. This is something that we can definitely work with. Then the last poll, and thanks so much for, for hanging in there with us. So the last poll is around distribution support. What would be most helpful for your company in terms of distribution support? And then we're kind of like looking at the operational aspects, right? So would you most need like best practices around health, hygiene, and safety for staff in the field and sales agents? Do you need ready prepared materials or trainings around health, hygiene, and staff and safety for staff in the field or for sales agents? Would it be helpful if we look into coordinating bulk purchasing of COVID-related items? And then I'm thinking of sanitizers, soap, or water dispensers. Would technical assistance around the digitalization of distribution channels, or this digitalization of sales, of payment collection, be most helpful? Or is the biggest need in support in advocating for off-grid solar sector as an essential service to enable the necessary operations to keep going? So votes are still coming in. I'll leave it up still again for another 10 seconds. Again, I would like to stress that please do, if any additional topical areas, any other support needs are not mentioned here, or you want to elaborate on something, drop everything in the chat box and we will make sure that we map everything out. All right, I'll close this one. The results here is that, well, some support in advocacy to mark the off-grid solar sector as an essential service is most needed, and then some TA around digitalization. All right. I think then thanks everyone for sharing your inputs so generously and for being so engaged. This is this is really helpful. Please do keep on sharing via the chat box, because I cannot stress enough how useful detailed information is right now for us. Now, as you saw in that earlier overview, in addition to financial TA and practical support, there's a lot of call, and as you also saw in this last poll, for targeted advocacy and lobbying. So with this, I will hand over to my colleague Namori, who can share an update on our current advocacy efforts.
Thank you, Evelyn. Hi, everyone. This is Namori Doumbia, speaking based in Senegal, in Dakar. I will present an update on the advocacy work we have at GOGLA, which seems to be a very important topic for everyone. Starting with an open letter. Sasha, next slide. Starting with an open letter that has been drafted for governments on the COVID-19. We will be sending an individual version of the letter to energy ministries across a community of champions countries, which are 16 national governments. Here's a summary of the letter. We stress that our members follow guidelines provided by ministries as well as the World Health Organization. We encourage members to consider their services as a practical component of the national response and keep the services running. We appeal to governments to consider off-grid products as an essential service. And we encourage members to think practically about how we as an industry can possibly contribute to national health efforts. This letter and the messages to government will be available on the website on the COVID-19, which would have all the resources on the subject. Guidance to the National Renewable Association. A template of this letter would also be sent to the National Renewable Associations for them to liaise with governments through the Power Up network. Our Power Up network comprises of 16 national renewable associations from across the continent. The letter will be open for them to continue filling in what is most important to them and the information that they'd like to communicate. On Friday, we will also have a communication with the National Renewable Association to stress a few points, particularly regarding off-grid solar products to be critical to consumers and communities during this pandemic. We also want to recognize that our distribution and services network are potential channels for transmission of the virus, but yet is an important and vital service. Yep. Next slide, please. The past 2 weeks has given us time to understand the need for the industry and the impact of the COVID-19 on the ground as the virus continues to spread across the continent and governments are taking more measures. The support that has been provided to members in the region has been initiated first from the response and mostly as an emergency solution. So far, we've been able to provide in certain countries vehicle permits to continue providing essential services. Some governments have acknowledged that indeed our industry is an essential service and has responded to our request favorably. Second off, we're also trying to identify areas for VAT exemptions. There are some support provided and our work on the ground is to make sure that our members are able to seek those supports, notably through VAT exemptions. This is ongoing in Senegal as well as Kenya. And third is to identify areas for cost reduction for consumers, but also for companies. As was mentioned by Koen earlier, pockets will be very tight going forward. And we've already identified a few areas where we could cut down costs. In Senegal, for example, through transfer fees, which is something that we want to continue doing with major transfer services. Thank you. Sasha, over to you.
Actually, it's back over to me now, Maury. This is Evelyn again. Thanks for the overview and update. It's really great to already see the current movement and developments already. I'll be brief. I'll just briefly wrap up this first section with sharing a little bit on how we are coordinating support. So on the TA and policy side. So GOGLA currently has connected with 35 sector support stakeholders and partners, and where we discuss basically how we can best support and how they can best support the industry. So our aim is to communicate the needs of our members and to coordinate, for example, offers of technical assistance to the industry from these partners. Which is why, of course, we needed all the detailed, we still need all the detailed information that you've been sharing with us. We are scheduling a sector support call within the next week with these partners. So if you are a sector support actor and you wish to offer support to the industry and you have not yet received an email from us, I would like to ask you to please contact my colleague Julie Kamel on the email address shown here. And just to clarify, as a final note, is that this is for technical and policy related assistance. And so any financial assistance is being channeled through the, or any financial assistance asks are being channeled through the Energy Access Action Group. And on that note, Koen, I'm handing back the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Evelien. Excellent presentation, excellent turnout and response as well to the polls. Thanks very much for participants. I'd like to introduce now Sarah Bieber, Leslie de Bruto, and Dirk Munk. Sarah and Leslie from Acumen, Dirk from Persistent. We've been working in a very good, very inspiring and positive way with the informal ad hoc working group that Sarah and Leslie have been pulling together, and we've particularly been encouraged by the proposal that they've been putting together with Dirk Munch around the relief fund and some initial response rates. I'm not sure how much they are ready to talk about that fund right now. But Sarah, maybe I can give the floor to you to share with the participants here on the webinar where you stand in terms of compiling the action from the investor community.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Koen, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to share really back with all of you that the investor community and the donor community have been very active and mobilized very quickly to organize ourselves to provide the support that the off-grid companies are going to be needing during this crisis and beyond. It's an ever expanding group of investors and donors at this point. What started as a small group of maybe 6 or 7 of us who have quite a few investments in the space has now grown to over 30, maybe even 40 different donors and investors represented. And we continue to get interest every day. So just to give you sort of a sense of this action network, as we're calling it, we're really just convening anybody who has raised their hand to say that they are interested in helping, whether that means mobilizing resources for technical assistance like Evelien just shared, or actual funding for a relief fund. We put surveys out into the field right away to understand the company's needs and to understand any funding that was already available, emergency funding that would already be available. And now that we have that sort of initial round of data, we have structured a concept for an energy relief fund, a sector-wide fund. And I can turn it over to Dirk and Leslie to share a little bit more about that fund specifically. But before I do, in addition to the relief fund, we're also putting together work streams to look at repayment, excuse me, repayment trends, so that we can identify opportunities for how to support, support intermediary lenders, support the PAYGO companies that are, having issues with collections, et cetera. And finally, we're looking at alternative financing beyond just a relief fund. Are there opportunities for temporary loan payment forgiveness? Are there ways to use RBFs creatively to continue to allow companies to service existing clients? Are there portfolio guarantees that we could be putting in place? So we're looking across the sector, not just at relief financing, but we have heard that call. We do understand the need for liquidity in this time. And so maybe Dirk and Leslie, I can hand it over to you to share a little bit about the terms of that fund.
Yes, sure. So this is Dirk from Persistent. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so we have been working on this relief fund now quite intensively for 2 weeks. And the idea is that, first of all, it should fit into the broader spectrum of all the initiatives that investors, donors are working on. What we saw initially, that there were many institutions that looked primarily and focused understandably first to establish the needs and serve the needs of their own portfolios. And we think this is excellent and really needed, but we also saw that given the potential impact of this crisis on our sector and the markets, that there may be need for something that goes beyond that and really is sector-wide and can also come online and support very quickly in order to help companies through this crisis, but also in order to help protect some of the advances we have made towards reaching SDG 7 and to protect one of the major impacts the sector has had beyond that, which is really the jobs, the local jobs created in emerging markets. And so this relief fund is really, again, sector-wide, focused on providing quick, unbureaucratic support in the event that the crisis gets more severe than what the flexibility and existing investor support can cover. So for now we're discussing terms that are essentially very concessionary and that mimic in many ways the terms that we see relief efforts have in developed markets. If you look at the US, if you look at Europe, Germany, Switzerland, they have launched very similar programs in order to protect their local economies and in particular to preserve jobs in these economies. And so this fund is essentially trying to mimic that and taking into account the fact that many of our governments or the governments of the markets where our companies are in might not be in a position to offer similar initiatives. So very roughly, we are thinking that $100 million might be a meaningful size If it's enough, obviously that will depend on how severe the crisis will hit our sector. But we have looked at this top down and bottom up, and so we think 100 million euros or dollars as size is a meaningful number and our target to put this together. We think that the fund will provide junior unsecured loans that essentially should give companies additional liquidity without increasing their debt burden. So while these are loans and structured as fixed income, they should really be seen as the most subordinated type of capital for the companies. They would have very low interest payments for the companies. We're thinking somewhere around 2%. And they would be quite long dated in terms of maturity to give the companies time to work through the crisis. While we think the crisis may last hopefully not longer than a year, and then economies should, given that there was no fundamental change, rebound quite quickly, should be able to recover. We still think that we want to provide a maturity of up to 5 years, but essentially require companies to repay as soon as they raise new equity within a certain period of time, and also make repayment possible at any time. So it's up to 5 years, but really we would expect that most of the support would be recycled and repaid within 2 to 3 years. Now, one important feature that the loans should also have, and that's also something we, where this fund mirrors the initiatives we see in developed markets, is it's clearly an idea is to promote job security. And so on the one hand, we will make the amount that companies can draw from this fund dependent on the current in-country expenses they have for staff. So it should be proportional to that. A larger company could borrow more because they should be expected to pay more for local staff. A smaller company could borrow less because they have less expenses, so that would be a natural scaling of the loans. It would also limit the maximum amount that companies can draw. And we're still thinking about how significant that or how firm that requirement should be, but we really want to encourage companies to use especially the funds from this relief fund in order to protect the local jobs and maybe not cut local employment as quickly as they might otherwise be forced to do if such a concessionary fund would not exist. So that may be a requirement that companies who access this fund need to maintain their staff at certain levels, say 90% of pre-crisis levels. So I'll stop there. It should give everyone a rough idea of the fund, of its purpose, and how it's structured. And hand over to Sarah, maybe if you want to add something, or Leslie.
Thanks,
no, great
Dirk.
work.
Oh, go ahead, Leslie.
Nope, you first, Sarah.
Do you have anything specific to the fund? I was just going to move on from that.
I say we move on, and I'm sure there'll be more questions. So I think Dirk did a great job covering it and its intentions.
Great. So we will have lots of time for questions. So I'm just going to wrap up quickly and say that this relief fund has a task force of investors and lenders that are meeting daily. For the next 2 to 3 weeks, we meet every day to try to, finalize and stand up the structure. So I just want to convey that everyone is moving 1,000 miles an hour and really rolling up our sleeves. And GOGLA is completely included in those efforts. So they will continue to be a go-to resource for updated information, but please let's use this remaining time to answer any questions that you might have. And then I'll hand it back to Koen.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Sarah, Leslie, and Dirk. Very informative. There's a number of questions streaming in. I'd like to remind you, if you have questions, to put that in the question or the chat box, and also to point out here the kind of assistance needs that you support needs that you do have. For instance, there was a comment here from Daniel Walden saying we can make some support available and experts, but we'd like to know if those experts are not just distracting management from more important questions, which they would find it totally understandable. So they'd like to understand how they can be most helpful. There's a number of practical questions around the fund that I'd like to feedback. For instance, a question that comes back in several forms is, how does the fund determine which companies get support? Does that also include smaller companies, and does that also include companies beyond Africa and India? Sarah, Dirk, Leslie, who would like to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's Leslie here. So I think the purpose of the vehicle, and we're really conscious of this, is that this isn't a big guys only a relief fund. We really want to make sure this is democratic, fair, equitable for companies large and small. So I would say that the intention is that even smaller companies could access it. Geographically agnostic, as long as they're contributing towards SDG 7 in some meaningful way. And the criteria, we're still fleshing that out as a team, but we want to make sure it's quick. I think that's the lesson we really took from Open Road Alliance, who is used to providing emergency funding, and their guidance to us was, whatever it is, make sure it's quick, but also thorough, to make sure that companies were in decent financial shape beforehand, to make sure that there's no kind of market distortion with respect to helping companies that had pre-existing conditions, so to speak, prior to coronavirus. But smaller companies naturally will have smaller operating costs and smaller overhead. So it should be easy to make sure that there's enough funding to go around to as many companies that need it. But again, as soon as we flesh out those kind of criteria for investment, we want to make sure those are as public as possible. So I think Dirk mentioned this, but we're going to be working at hopefully getting a web page, kind of a landing page for this that's owned, by the sector. It's really not owned by any of us particularly, that has those criteria publicly available. And then companies can start getting information together internally, submitting those, and then, really first come, first serve, every month, really reassessing new batches of applications to make sure that funds can move as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Leslie. A number of people are asking very practically, where do they apply? Who do they send emails to find out more about the relief fund and to apply? Do you think you can answer that question as well?
Yeah. I think it would just be hold tight, and I'm sure you'll hear about it. If you, Koen, I'm kind of offering your support in advertising this publicly once we have a place to send things. I think we're still very much in development phase, but once there is kind of that landing page and applications can be live and accepted, we'd love to promote that through maybe even Gogla's weekly newsletter on the Fridays, to just share that link and make sure that everyone has access to it equitably. And as soon as that site and applications are live, we'll share it as soon as we can. Yeah,
maybe in terms of a bit of expectation management, a couple of questions are coming in. When is this going to be live? Maybe you can shed some light on how likely is it that the fund will be available at the size, the 100 million that Dirk said you were aiming at, and do you have any guess on when it will be operational?
Dirk or Sarah, do you want to take this one?
Well, I mean, that's really hard to say, and we are so far really encouraged by the active outreach from possible funders and contributors, and also by the flexibility they have shown so far, because as you can imagine, everyone can envision this slightly different, and I think there is not a single right way. But I think what we are seeing now is that there's quite a lot of appreciation of that fact, and therefore also an idea that it may not be perfect, but it may be best to find a fast compromise, and so that's really encouraging. in terms of how quick it can go from here, I mean, there is some administrative aspect. How quickly can you open up a new bank account where contributors can pay into, and from where we can make loans? That will take a few weeks. And beyond that, it's a question how quickly can institutions make decisions. Really hard to say, but we are pushing for weeks and not months. And yeah, that's where I leave it. But so far, I'm very encouraged by the wide array of interest. It includes governments, it includes investors that are now discussing this. And one thing we have heard is that there are many initiatives out there right now, but this has been quite well developed to this point. It's concrete, and that's what investors so far like about it. It's also equitable, available to the whole market, and has a built-in mechanism to protect impact, i.e. jobs. And so, yeah, all these things really speak for it and make us as a team optimistic. But yeah, it will require support, and it will require leadership of institutions who step forward and move ahead. I also want to point out that, for example, Shell Foundation moved very quickly to support this initiative, so far with a small grant, but it just shows that it requires leadership now, and we are encouraged from the signs that we see that it may come together.
Thanks, Dirk. I got a very hard question here on the chat box, which I want to pose nonetheless. One person is asking, how do we expect paygo companies to maintain jobs if there's no demand anymore for new device for the next 3 years or so, due to high currency risk, inflation, bankrupt countries, etc.? I think the underlying question is, what would you advise companies right now to do with their staff? Do they need to intervene drastically to cut their losses, or do they need to hold and maintain their staff? A difficult question. Do you have any suggestions or perspectives on this, Dirk?
Yeah, I don't think there's one right answer. I think I can share our perspective on the crisis, how long it may last, and the way this looks for us at the moment is that this is a very steep, very fast moving recession, global recession, that has come on very quickly. I mean, look at how fast the stock market crashed. It's really unprecedented. But it can equally quickly go away. If we find out that we have a vaccine, you will see that within a few weeks and months, markets recover, activity resumes. And I would say the way we look at it as investors in the sector is that fundamentally the situation hasn't changed. The sector is still selling a product with a good margin into a market with very large demand. There is now kind of a how should I say, there is a big barrier that was put in front of everyone, but that may as well be lifted in, let's say, hopefully shorter than 12 months. And then we would expect that growth resumes. And if you now want to cut staff, that's a reasonable reaction to falling revenues. But at the same time, I think everyone who has ever built a distribution organization in emerging markets knows that there is some high cost involved in doing so. And there may also be a high cost involved in restarting. And it may be better to maintain staff, in particular if there is support around from organizations that are focused on supporting that, like this in the fund initiative. It may be better to maintain staff such that companies can more quickly rebound if the crisis, or let's say the social distancing measures that are introduced go away and the global economy is resuming its growth.
Thank you very much, Dirk. There's a lot more technical questions around the relief fund coming in, practical technical questions. I think I'm not going to pose all those questions to you, as you will need to tell people you're still figuring out. There's one question that came in 2 different forms. Is Argogla and the Action Network also considering to help out with electrifying health institutions and GOGLA members supporting public institutions? And maybe I can answer this front myself, and maybe Sarah, you can chime in. The relief fund is, of course, is only, as Dirk clearly pointed out, it's only one of the mechanisms. We've also connected with World Bank SMAP team, who is looking at how result-based financing can help to keep customer payment options in a better shape. We are connecting at the moment with Sustainable Energy for All. We're thinking about how to mobilize relief funding, also more focused on the customer and the customer wallet. And the idea of companies helping to electrify health institute, etc., is of course also a very logical and sound idea. Not covered here. If we will learn of such initiatives, we will certainly add that to our resource page. It's not something that GOGLA at the moment is putting on its priority list of actions. We need to prioritize to a certain degree too, but I think there's certainly a topic where we would expect others to step up and launch initiatives, and we'll put that on our website. Looking at Sarah, is there anything else you want to say on other things coming out of the Energy Access Network beyond the relief fund?
No, I will just say that you mentioned it, alluded to it just now, Koen. There is an SC for All effort underway to better understand customer level, end user level relief, and what they might be positioned to do to mobilize capital for that end of it. So I do see this health. That's a great question on the health and public institutions. I'll take that forward back to the Action Network on the next call and see if we can organize a stream to focus on that and see what's already happening.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is end this the Q&A block. Please consider, do continue to send us more information about your needs. People have been asking where can we send more questions and information to. Send it to GOGLA if you can't find the access to Leslie or Sarah or Dirk directly, but do keep an eye on our website and the resource page. Meanwhile, what I'd like to point out to you is that a recording of this webinar will be available. We will also share more information on the presentations in the resource center. Keep an eye on that. And secondly, very important, in 2 days' time, we will follow up with a second webinar that is hosted jointly by GOGLA with IFC and Frankfurt Institute of Finance around how to deal with business risk in a cash-constrained situation. You can find more information on our website. You can register for the webinar there. And if that is a relevant topic to you, I certainly encourage you to listen in to that webinar. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing all the information. I'd like the audience for listening in and joining actively in the polls. And I wish you a lot of wisdom, patience, and strength in working through the crisis from the pandemic. We'll be in touch, hopefully, with you soon, and good luck.